When I first came to Kingston, having grown up here, but I'd been away for 30-some years, I immediately headed down to the waterfront and would walk my dog every morning before going to see my mom in the hospital. And I took up with a bunch of keen swimmers very soon, and I ended up in conversation with the mayor at the time, and just idle chat, and I mentioned that I was a keen swimmer, and he said, "Oh, where do you swim?" And I said, "In the lake." And he said, "You don't swim in there." And I said, "Well, yes, I do." And it's kind of sad to me that not many Kingstonians do enjoy the water the way they used to. It used to be Lake Ontario Park and City Park were places where hundreds of people would congregate on lovely summer days, and they would be in the water, playing in the water, and so forth. I'll speed it up, but about 5, 6, even 7 years ago, David and I are not sure, our first speaker, David McDonald, but a wonderful thing happened. A mass swim was organized down at Breakwater Park, or at Richardson Beach. The first one is at Richardson Beach, where the bathhouse is. And hundreds of people showed up, just like in the old days. And our first speaker is a professor at Queen's in Global Studies, but I'm not going to dwell upon that. He's a real grassroots organizer, and he was behind this marvelous event that really was a very soft way of raising awareness of an issue. Let's pay attention to our beautiful waterfront by jumping into it and frolicking around like we did in the old days. So David is going to tell you more about what that led to. There was another mass swim, and the city responded, and we're fortunate to have with us today Neil Unsworth at the table here, manager of Parks Development, and to his right, Kristen Hébert, the coordinator for Parks Development. The city responded, and as many of you will know, there's a wonderful plan to rejuvenate and renew Breakwater Park now, and it's going to be really exciting. Along the way, after the second mass swim, and it became bigger and better, the same group, largely inspired by a very self-effacing leader, David McDonald, said, let's do something we'll call the Shoreline Shuffle. And I think David will tell you about that. But that too had a wonderful ripple effect with the public. This was very constructive citizen activism, grassroots activism and engagement with our city. And it's led to wonderful things that you're going to hear about today. So now we're working on an integrated waterfront master plan. And that's why our second speaker is a very accomplished landscape architect, a principal and founder of the firm Think, Peter Heyblom. And we're delighted that Peter has come down to us today from Toronto to give you a sense of the opportunities that are evolving in this lengthy but really productive consultation phase which the city has embarked on. So I'm going to call upon David to start things off. And as Diane said, remember, get your questions lined up. Be prepared, because this is a really excellent opportunity to learn more about the possibilities and how we can all support renewal of Kingston's waterfront. David.
Yeah. Great. Oops. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming. I want to give you a good news story today. We have, I think, a really amazing, I think quite literally, lifetime opportunity here to do something with our waterfront that we've never done. It's, excuse me, I'm just getting over a cold here. I'll try and keep this to a minimum. 300 years of European settlement in this city, 280 kilometers of shoreline, and we've never had a master waterfront plan for Kingston. And we are now in the process of putting this together. And I'm going to talk a little bit today about what I think is the kind of difficult and frustrating at times, but good news story about how we got to where we are. Peter's going to talk a little bit later about the highlights of where we're at with that. But I also want to talk about some difficult choices ahead. In some ways, the easy part is over or coming to an end, and I think we need to be prepared for some really difficult choices ahead. And I want to highlight what those are without raining on the parade, just sort of putting a bit of a reality check into where I think, at a personal level, where I think we're headed. So I mentioned the scale of what we're up against. Now, 280 kilometers seems like a lot. We often just think of our downtown shoreline, of which there are maybe 40, 50 kilometers if you take all the nooks and crannies. But we've got the Cataraqui River, we've got some inland lakes, et cetera. So these are all included in this discussion of our waterfront shoreline. And we have some really fantastic spots. I've just selected some random ones here. That's actually my daughter's rowing practice one morning at 5:30 a.m. on the left in the Inner Harbor. The Inner Harbor is one particular gem that we don't really pay a heck of a lot of attention to and is now starting to get more attention. So we really have some fantastic places along our waterfront. But we've got some really ugly stuff too. And so this is partly bringing attention to bringing these good places back to the forefront, back to people's attention, and trying to fix up these dilapidated, forgotten about locations. And it's a very complex thing in terms of ownership between different levels of government, different jurisdictional realms, public and private spaces, et cetera. So we're just trying to get a handle on who owns what, who has authority over what, et cetera. So this is one of the things that the consultancy team is working on. And so I coordinate something called the Water Access Group, community group that's been trying to motivate, to bring attention to these things. And I'll talk a little bit about the kind of principles of public water and public spaces a little later, because I think that's sort of keeping that notion of publicness alive is one of the challenges that we're going to have as we move forward. So Chris mentioned the first mass swim, and we had a couple of these, and my colleague Jamie Linton and I set it up, and we thought, oh, maybe 20 people will show up. And we had close to 300 people, which was absolutely fantastic. It was an amazing event down at Richardson. Got some attention from the city, but 4 years later, we were still frustrated with what seemed like a very slow pace of change. So we had another mass swim, this time at Breakwater Park and the pier on the top right there, and we had about 400 people show up to that event. And again, attracted a lot of attention to a particular place, and the city has now put together, I think, a wonderful plan for Breakwater Park. But we realized as well that the bigger issue here is not so much these individual spaces as it is the waterfront as a whole and the lack of connectivity. And I don't just mean the physical connectivity, walking from place to place or biking from place to place, but the kind of connectivity with the spirit of the city. How does it connect to the downtown? How does it connect to different parts of the city? And so we had an event called the Shoreline Shuffle, where we tried to bring attention to the good, the bad, and the ugly of our downtown shoreline. It was about a 7.5 kilometer stretch from the Inner Harbor around to Lake Ontario Park. And we had 500 or 600 people show up at this event to walk, paddle, and cycle from one space to another, along with some really fantastic artwork. Sue Sheedy, a friend and colleague of mine, organized about 15 artists to do a one-day word art exhibition. And there's a short little 2.5-minute video here that I want to show you, in part because it gives you a sense of the enthusiasm and the space, but also the kind of goodwill that came out of this. And I'll talk about that. There's very few, this is probably the only thing I've worked on in my life where everybody kind of agrees with what we're after here. So hopefully this link will work, and we've got some volume, and we'll just watch this short little video.
Hey!
show about the pieces that we've got, pieces that we don't, the kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly of this 7.7 kilometer stretch of downtown shoreline here. We've got wonderful art installations set up along the way. Figure out how we can create a connected waterfront.
There goes Jane, working on a corner, honey. Take a look in my eyes. She needed more than money from the neighborhood. These are the people in your neighborhood. I took a look inside. I saw the love in your eyes. We broke down your door. Yeah, we broke down your door. Hey! Hey! There goes Jim, signed up for the army. Take a look in my eye. Showed me all the glory in the neighborhood. These are the people in your neighborhood. There goes John, just holding hands with Larry. Take a look in my eye. I said they could marry in the neighborhood. These are the people in your neighborhood. I took a look inside. I saw the love in your eyes. We broke down your door. Yeah, we broke down your door. Hey!
These are the people
In your neighborhood.
We have a website. If you just Google Water Access Group, there's a Facebook and website that has that video and many others actually, and lots of photos and history of things that we've done. So if you want to have a look at that, just quick Google. I just thought I'd throw in here quickly too. We've been trying to push the winter stuff, and this last winter was a fabulous winter. In fact, our Cogeco person here did a great little video that we posted on our Facebook page that got something like 5,000 hits of people skating and the wonderful DN ice boat races that we had that John Curtis organized, who's here. And that picture in the top right was a friend and I skating to Gananoque a few years ago. So I think we really need to think about this as a kind of 12-month of the year space and not just the kind of 2 or 3 months in the summer that get so much attention. So where do things stand now? We have this waterfront planning group in place, which has been fantastic. It's been going now for about 1.5 years. A full draft is going to be ready in June. I gather June 24th is going to be the date that that full draft will be presented to the city as a whole. There's been 6 focus areas and lots of attention and interest in this kind of planning process, and Peter will give you an overview of that. And this broad support thing, I think, really is remarkable. I mean, there's been up to 100 people at some of these meetings that have gone on in different sections of the waterfront. And I have never worked on anything in my life where everybody agrees. Young and old, suburban, downtown, wealthy, low income, everybody I speak to just says, yeah, why doesn't Kingston have a better downtown, and not just downtown, but a better waterfront in general? And so it's been a lot of fun and very exciting and encouraging to work on something where there's such broad support for what we're trying to do. And uniquely, we have council fully on board. Even the last council voted unanimously to move forward with this waterfront planning process. And certainly this current council, and our mayor in particular, have made it very clear that they want the waterfront to be a priority. So in a sense, we've got all the kind of ducks lined up here and a real opportunity to do something interesting and important in the short and long term with our waterfront. So this is all very positive and very exciting news. Now I'll just go to some of the challenges. And there's three things that I want to highlight in particular. The first one is sustaining enthusiasm. I think we need to turn this thing into a living document, in part because of the kind of timelines that we're looking at. As Peter will mention, there's some things that I think we need to and can do in the short term. There's a couple of projects, Douglas Fleur, Breakwater Park, which are complete. They're sitting on the shelf, ready to go. Some of them are budgeted for, et cetera. So I think we're going to see some action in the next few years, and that's important that we do that. But it's taken us 300 years of European settlement to create this manufactured waterscape. It's going to take a long time to change it again. And we need to be thinking out 10, 20, 50, 100 years. Now, that seems like a long way away, and so it's going to be our kids and our grandkids, et cetera, they're going to have to take this up. But I think turning this into a living document that doesn't just sit on a shelf, that it's going to change as well. What happens in 50 years from now, the kind of technologies and the those things are going to change as well. But I just don't want to see this thing sit on the shelf and gather dust. We need to make it something that's going to repeat and continue and make a long-term impact on the city. Priorities and costs. This is where sort of rubber hits the road. There's a lot of potential money that's going to need to be invested. If I remember correctly, this sort of downtown stretch here, rough estimate of about $30 million worth of projects that could take place. And there's 6 focus areas in total. We're talking about tens and tens of millions of dollars that are going to need to be invested to do the kinds of things that we want to do. So we're going to have to make tough decisions about what we do first. And there's going to be competing interests on that. And so, whose voices get heard, why these things get prioritized. I mean, this is no different than any other kinds of budgeting decision in the city. But one of the things we've had is a number of interest groups, everything from the scuba divers to the kiteboarders to the salamander and turtle people, working together on these things. And I hope that we can continue to work in a really collegial way and try and think about how we're going to move forward and make these priorities. But more importantly, I think, is how we're going to compete waterfront stuff with other things that we do in the city. And for example, we've just spent $67 million widening Counter Street. And we're going to spend a lot more money when we continue to expand Counter Street, not to mention some of the other infrastructure and roads and other things that we've got going on in the city. So are we really wanting to spend money in those areas? Do we want to rethink about our priorities in this city, about where we want to invest, what kind of place we want to be? It's our waterfront, really, which makes Kingston a unique place and could make it even richer and more unique than it is already. That's not to say we don't want to spend money on roads, and I'm not just picking on roads. There's lots of other things that we need to think about. But if we're going to make the kinds of changes that we want to make, it's not just going to be about where we prioritize our waterfront, but what kind of a city we want to imagine and build in the future. And I don't know if anyone remembers having any conversation about $67 million on widening Counter Street. That's a lot of money that goes into things. And so I think if we're going to have this kind of conversation, we need to think about the waterfront more holistically in terms of the kind of priorities that where we're spending our money in the city. And the third point is a kind of commitment to publicness. And that, I think one of the things we're going to get out of this master plan is some sets of principles about how we want to build in the future. And if you look at our downtown stretch here, which we can see out of the window, there hasn't been a lot of thought that's gone into that. Buildings have sort of turned their back on the water. They may be on the water, but they're not of the waterfront. And I mean, we're sitting in a building right now that put a parking lot on the water side, not to bite the hand that just fed us, but see, these are the kinds of decisions that have taken place in the past, which we can hopefully try and avoid in the future with the kinds of principles of what we want to construct in quite literally concrete ways, and the kinds of public spaces that we want to have out of what we construct. But there's also the kind of social infrastructure and political infrastructure of publicness that I think the waterfront offers us a unique opportunity to build on. And I've focused on the kind of recreational activities of our waterfront, but you may have seen in that video there that we had a little water ceremony. A local Aboriginal woman did a water ceremony at the start of it. And we have thousands of years of Aboriginal history on this shoreline. How are we going to think about and remember that? How are we going to build that into our sense of waterfront? And the kind of diverse spaces and needs that we have in this city. Not everybody's a sailor or a cyclist or a swimmer or a salamander interest person. There are other people that have other interests in what's going on the waterfront. And with 280 kilometers of shoreline, we have that opportunity to create those kinds of diverse spaces. But I think we want to kind of recreate the kind of shared spaces that we've had in the past. Some of the sort of old-timers, if you will, who came up with these these mass swims would say, I remember coming down here as a kid in the 50s and 60s, and there'd be hundreds of people down here. People from the north end, people from the south side. It was a very kind of mixed sense of community. And the water, again, is something unique that can bring people together. So I think we want to avoid just constructing a kind of waterfront for people with resources to swim and sail and do other things. How are we going to get kids from the North End engaging again with the waterfront? And I've actually been in conversation with the Boys and Girls Club about trying to think about ways that we can create opportunities for kids to do that. So it's a sense of water as a public space. And what I think this last point here is water as a public good is that it's not just a recreational thing, it's not just a cultural thing. I mean, we are quite literally water. And I'm assuming the water you're drinking here is from the tap, which is from our lake. And so if, as Chris said, the mayor of Kingston didn't know if it was safe to swim in the lake, and I had a similar kind of encounter with one of our previous mayors, then we need to know that. And we have, in fact, invested an enormous amount of money. The single biggest capital investment in Kingston's history was for the Ravensview water treatment plant. Fantastic thing that has helped dramatically to clean up the Great Lakes, our area in particular, and slowly but surely the Great Lakes Basin is being improved, and water is, in fact, by and large, safe to swim in. But if it isn't, we need to know why that's happening and what we can do about it. So again, water gives us an opportunity to think in a kind of hydrological, physical sense, but also a kind of cultural sense about how water can bring us together, how it impacts on our health, how it impacts on our recreation. So in a sense, this is an amazing opportunity not just to think about the waterfront, but to think about the community. I mean, here we are at the Community Foundation. What kind of communities do we want to build? And this waterfront master plan, I think, gives us an opportunity to think not just about the physical infrastructure, but the social infrastructure of what kind of city we want to build. So I'll just close with a few comments on what I think we can all do individually to make a difference on this front. First is obviously just staying informed. When June 24th comes along, if you haven't been to any of these meetings, make a point of coming down to City Hall, seeing this draft master plan, making comments on it, learning about where we're headed, pushing for change. And everybody's going to have their own interest, and that's fine. You know, if your interest is in one particular park or one particular piece of recreation or something, that's fine to push for that. And we need people to get out there and make these things happen. So, you know, not everybody can think in that holistic sense, but you know, pushing for your own piece is important. Thirdly, of course, volunteering to try and make things happen. I think we need to push the city to make these things happen. And some of these large capital infrastructure projects are not going to be driven by a handful of people with shovels. We do need the city to back this stuff up. But there are smaller things that we can do to try and move things along. And then I'll just close as well. There's going to be big infrastructure projects which are going to require a lot of money. But there are also smaller kinds of things that we can do individually with smaller donations or larger donations as well that can make things happen. And the kinds of partnering that can take place between community members, the private sector, and the city, I think we can move things along if we work collectively. Thank you.
So thank you everyone for coming and having me here. I'm very honored. I wanted to just say that my experience of the Kingston Waterfront started with Douglas Fleur Park, which is a master plan we completed about a year ago. And at that point I realized how wonderful and how special your waterfront was. And it really, we were really honored actually to work on this project. So here we are, we're going to talk about a vision for Kingston's waterfront. It's a huge, huge area. We've gone through a lot of public consultation to this point. So I'll try to condense it as much as I can. But I urge you to come on June 24th because we're stitching it all together. And you'll see basically, where we're at that point. So like David said, it's a huge area. It's 280 kilometers of shoreline. It's 6 focus areas. So that's how we broke it down into the different areas. So we actually could somehow cohesively meet with the public in all these different areas. Now the 1 to 6, we started 1 in January, and we just finished 6. So you can see the numbers on the screen basically indicating where the different areas were. You can't read the fine print, but hopefully you can read the bigger numbers. But the different focus areas basically have gone from a lot of urban areas to the suburban areas. And it basically goes through all the different waterfronts in the city of Kingston. We just finished number 6, which is here. But we started with 1. But you can see, this just to David McDonald's point here, like how little the urban waterfront, the downtown urban waterfront is very little when you consider how much is there. It's so much. So what is our master plan? Basically, like David said, I think it's like a living document. It should be something that doesn't sit in the shelf, that becomes a framework for what you want it to be. It becomes something that prioritizes your different projects and identifies improvements for access and connectivity. Now why? Why are we doing this? There's been so many studies done on the waterfront, and a lot of these projects are coming up, and how do we build them? How do we go about it? And so this master plan is stringing these things together. And this is actually part of the June 24th meeting, is we're trying to get people's input, because we're going to show you all these different projects that I will touch upon. And then you'll tell us, what do you really want to see next? What do you really want to feel is important as part of your waterfront experience? So just some of the milestones, because I think we're going into the latter third now of where we're going. So we had 6 workshops, like I said. We have the 24th meeting, which is the stitch together plan. Then after that, we're going to do refinements over the summer, and then we'll have a final meeting in the fall. Now the plan implementation is what we're trying to strategically show is 20-year and 50-year projects. So we have 50-year projects that are the big projects that are just not going to happen, but then we have the low-hanging fruit, I always like to call it, the things that you can do in 20 years, even 10 years. So we're trying to prioritize between those 2 elements. We're also prioritizing between the rural waterfronts, which is a large portion of it, and these are a little bit more nodal. We're treating them, it's a little bit difficult to actually connect them with full connectivity, so it's nodal connectivity, and nodal just means pockets. So we have different parks, different areas, and different improvements. And then we have the urban waterfronts. And now the urban waterfronts, we're looking for full connectivity. And that basically is from Collins Bay to Treasure Island. Now, this full connectivity, what does it mean? It means basically a connection. It doesn't have to necessarily be on the waterfront, but somehow through neighborhoods, through different cultural elements, all the way to the other side. So we're really focusing on access, connectivity, and enhancement. Those are very important things. And that's really what's really kind of entrenched in our look at the waterfront. Now, in our office, we actually, I don't want to just say this, I didn't actually have a slide on this, but we always called it the back is the new front, because for so long, the waterfront has been treated as a backyard. It's been treated as a loading dock, which isn't necessarily bad, but it's not really the front yard where you want your public experience to really shine. And so we like to switch people's thinking, switch it around. This is your front yard. You don't necessarily need to put parking on it. You don't necessarily have to put all your loading on it. There's a park actually in Toronto that's really, really done well, and it's Sugar Beach, and it's actually done by Claude Cormier. And it's right across from a sugar refinery. So you can actually sit there, you can watch the harbor working, and still have an enjoyable park experience. And I think this is something that can cohabitate along the waterfront, but still be an enjoyable space for people to be. Now, the next few slides, I'm actually going to give you a glimpse of where we've kind of come from. Like, I'm going to go through actually each little area, just kind of touching on them to show you, what we've drawn so far. So this is focus area 1, and by no means are you going to see this on the slide. So again, come on the 24th to see it. But you can see what we've talked about is connecting around. In focus area 1, this is basically the Cataraqui River. And we're talking about access, connections and improvements. This includes Doug Fleur, includes Bell Island, includes the area around the marsh, up to the docks, all the way around the other side. And there's all these opportunities and parks and connections that you can make. It's a great walk. We've done it. So it's really beautiful. And I think we've encountered some spaces that I just never knew how existed in Kingston. Here's just an example of some of the sketches that we've put together. This is showing Douglas Fleur, some examples of what might happen in front of the tannery. Now, focus area 2, this was actually in January, and this is the rural landscapes. So each one of those squares represents panels that we presented for the different areas. And each one of those areas had different nodal improvements, different park projects. Most people probably don't even know it exists. Maybe the locals do, but a lot of people in Kingston do not. There's a lot of connections that can happen, a lot of improvements that can happen in those areas. This is Cecil and Wilma Park, and this is just one example. It's a sketch that we actually presented to the public, and this is a project that actually could happen. And part of it actually is a park now. Maybe you might not know it, but a large portion of it is Crown land that people use right now. But it's an opportunity waiting to happen, something that people can use, experience the waterfront, not necessarily an urban waterfront, but a waterfront nonetheless. Now, focus area 3, which is what we started in February, it goes from Lemoyne Point to Elevator Bay. And again, it looks to connect Lemoyne Point to Elevator Bay through different neighborhoods, through some on-road connections. We'd look at improving on-road connections because a large portion of that is not very good. And we actually connect to Elevator Bay. Now, Elevator Bay, one of the interesting projects that we're looking at is puncturing through that breakwater. We're looking at it with our shoreline engineer, because I actually didn't know this. Maybe some of you actually do know this, but the water edge here, and I've heard several people say this, used to be sand, which is really quite interesting. And it's not like that anymore. And it's because they built the breakwater, the use has changed. But I mean, there's no reason why maybe we can't puncture it. Right? Let water in. Let it reestablish itself. Maybe we can reclaim that waterfront that used to be a beach, which is great. Then we get to Lake Ontario Park, and that actually gets us into focus area 4. Lake Ontario Park is great. The city's doing some great work there. We connect from there to the Olympic Harbor, and then we connect to the penitentiary. Olympic Harbor, penitentiary, wow. There are some great opportunities there. Think about that. You know, the penitentiary, you got the cultural heritage, Olympic Harbor. You know, all these are slated for something really special to happen. And you know, this is something that we're working with the city because this is all kind of happening in the same time as we're working on it. But wow, what a great opportunity! You can really improve your waterfront. You can connect to, you know, the further lands down, and then as we get to through the neighborhoods to the TET Center, which is a great building. And you know, what I noticed in Kingston, and this is something, you know, that coming from an outsider, is you have some great architecture. And some people may not like it, but I mean, you have some really, really interesting architecture happening here. There's really some great things. And then we connect to Breakwater Park, which is another great park that is part of the whole gamut of what parks are happening right now in Kingston. Focus Area 4 also has McDonald Park. What a great park. And what we did here is we took a stab at sort of consolidating it, moving the parking again away from the water, you know, playing with the helicopter pad, because what a weird transition to kind of walk behind the helicopter pad, and you're walking suddenly behind the parking, and you're like, so how is this happening? But anyway, so we're trying to push the envelope, move things away from the water, because people want to be there. You want green to be there. You want those sort of activities. You can see here we're connecting to Breakwater. Richardson Beach, you know, and this has been talked about a lot, but this is a great cultural element, and something that you really want to improve. And then you get to Focus Area 5, which is basically the urban waterfront. And this is an amazing section of waterfront. You have a lot of dock uses, you have a lot of opportunities for recreation, you have a lot of connections you can improve. This is showing Confederation Park. Part of the, this actually doesn't show it, but part of the improvements we're thinking of is maybe a walk along the breakwater, improvements at Confederation Park, but even walks, and this is actually a slide in David's talk here. You can go around, and it's a cavernous experience, and there's things you can do that are pretty simple to kind of make that better. Extend the cantilever out, move it out, move the people away from the wall, get some light in there, get more people walking there. You know, and just improvements to cultural historical sites, and also even the ferry terminals. What can you do there to make the experience a little bit more inviting for people? Tourism is such an important industry, and to bring people to your waterfront and not treat it as your back, which I think is changing, really makes people want to visit more. It gives them a continuous experience. And what we're proposing is basically the yellow line, a continuous experience, a promenade. It's inviting, that people want to walk under. It's treed in certain areas. It's protected to a certain degree where people can sit and enjoy the waterfront. So again, here's a slide. These are some of the sketches that we have that we will show on the 24th. This, you know, improvements to Confederation Park. We have a lot of different opportunities there. Oh, here's actually the sketch that we're showing with the breakwater. Takes us to Focus Area 6. It's interesting because you go from Collins Bay all the way to Treasure Island, and you have this experience. You have these historical landscapes, you have these suburban landscapes, you have these downtown landscapes, you have cultural landscapes, you have Fort Henry, and it's such an experience from one end to the other, and it's quite a wonderful experience. And after seeing them all, it's really incredible. So here we're working with RMC to actually walk around their lands. Fort Henry, we have some plans with them to walk through their properties, and also through the military lands. And then we have a series of connections through some neighborhoods, through some public land, all the way to Treasure Island. So you have the opportunity to actually walk from one side to the other. There's a series of parks along the way, and there's also proposed improvements for each one of those as well. Now I'm going to show you some pretty pictures. The pretty pictures show this is what other people have done. This is the Breakwater Walk in Victoria, BC. It gets people out in the water. You know, you have these great sort of pieces that extend into the water. Why not use them? This is something that was done in Thunder Bay. Again, great sort of spaces that use the waterfront. Public brings them down to the water. This is in Quebec. And I really like this project. It's quite a neat project, and it extends all the way along the river. And it shows a lot of opportunities for, you know, how people ecologically buffer from the water, how they actually can treat multi-use with different, you know, sidewalk opportunities and bike opportunities. I really like this shot because it shows how people can get down to the water through steps, through different opportunities, through if you have riprap edges and things that seem really inaccessible, how can you get people down there? But also trails, because you have a lot of opportunities that are not urban. That's more, you know, more passive, so people can get through the landscape. And even less, you know, less visited sort of, you know, these are opportunities as well for less traveled trails as well. It doesn't have to all be main pathways. There's so many opportunities in Kingston to get your canoe out and get down to the water. So again, improvements just with those access points. Different treatments of water with boardwalk. And outlooks, overlooks. You have a lot of, you know, I'm thinking of Port Henry for one. Or even simpler. A lot of places you have a lot of viewing opportunities. So this is actually in Port Union. And it's a simple treatment, really. You know, just gets people to the water. They can overlook. They can have an enjoyable experience. So what are our next steps? Like I said, we're advancing all these different focus areas that we've touched on today, based on the input we've got from these 6 focus areas. We're taking them, we're stitching them together for the June 24th meeting. You're all going to come to the June 24th meeting. You're going to take a look at all the different plans that we have up. What we're thinking is we're probably going to have some sort of matrice at each station, or a matrice is a very fancy word for chart. So we're going to have a chart at each station, and we'll probably with a slew of projects related to each focus area. And people will just go up with their, you know, with dots or whatever, and say, hey, we really like this one, or we really like this one. And they'll really inform us what's important to you. What would you like to see first? Then after that, we'll take that back and we'll finalize the master plan over the summer. And then in the fall, we'll present all this again to you, and we'll go from there. Hopefully that wasn't too long. Thank you very much.
Now we have another mic. How do we turn it on? Well, that was fabulous, gentlemen. Could we invite some questions from our audience right here?
A very interesting presentation focusing on environmental livability, connectivity. Has any thought been given to what you can do with serious planning areas that have been dealt with in the past? And I'm specifically thinking of Elevator Bay, which has a derelict pier on it adjacent to a very nice townhouse complex. And it has been the subject of God knows how many efforts to try and redevelop. Zoned for 384 apartment units, condominium units, on a long spit of land, access to which goes right through the middle of a townhouse development. I mean, it looks like a terrible planning idea, maybe good for tax revenues, but not something much for livability. Has any thought been given to what can be done there?
Well, I'm going to answer the question regarding the derelict pier. Now, the derelict pier, I think there is some planning documents that show that it might be developed at some point. But I think part of the problem in the history of Kingston is that there was no guiding document that kind of outlined sort of these general principles that showed what should happen when the waterfront is developed. So say the derelict pier is being developed, this document will inform sort of how that will happen in a sensitive way that still allows for that ribbon of connectivity along the waterfront to happen. And also it informs that it protects it. So, this document, from my perspective, it ensures that connectivity will happen and that the development will be done in a sensitive way, say for the derelict pier. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but.
Sorry, if I could just add to that, Chris, to say, I mean, I think there's a lot of technical questions about, bylaws and ownership and so on. And we have, a team of people working on these things, lawyers and real estate people, et cetera. And those are going to be really important. But there's a culture that we need to think about as well, getting back to my earlier point about publicness. And so, people laws are there to kind of guide us, but do we want to allow people to walk in front of space that we may own? Do we want to encourage activities on things that might not be technically public spaces? Do we want to allow these connectivities to happen? So, I think now we have a culture that is very much about privacy and about protecting our space. And that's not going to change overnight. This is the generational kind of thing that's going to take time to change. But I think that this is the kind of moment we have to have these conversations, and we need to be patient about it. But and not all 300 whatever condo owners are going to want a lot of traffic in front of their place necessarily. So it's a combination of the kind of technical, legal, and the kind of cultural shifts that need to take place to make this happen. So I think it's a bit of both.
You're almost answering the question I was about to ask. I was on the Kingston Township Planning Committee at the time of an official plan that never came to fruition because it planned for waterfront connectivity, and a small group of waterfront property owners, I think just about single-handedly, dumped the entire official plan because they were concerned it was going to step across their own private property. This is getting me to, if we get this good plan in place, and you've already touched on a bit of this, how do we keep it from becoming shelfware that sits on a shelf, and then the first bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, and I don't mean to sound negative, but a developer who proposes something that will bring a great track space to the city of Kingston, ignores the plan, and we approve it. How do we, and this is more for you, David, probably, how do we as a community make those cultural changes so it doesn't become shelfware?
Well, I think the rules are changing a little bit too. You look at the city's master plan and the kinds of things that are in there now about, for example, a ribbon of life is the language that they use for our waterfront. So I think we have a lot of tools on our side to try and promote a new vision. And so we can look to those things and to make those things happen. But there's also kind of strategic stuff in place. So, Peter talked about the low-hanging fruit. And some of those things would be, lands that are owned by government, some federal, some provincial, and these are public lands that we can, I think, make claims to. Trying to carve a waterfront path in front of 20 private homes is probably not the most strategic thing to do in the short term. And I must say, Neil Unsworth from the city, I think, has been very smart and strategic about approaching this in ways that aren't going to get people's backs up. My job, I think, is to push the envelope, and I know it frustrates Neil sometimes that I do this, but because there are a lot of very powerful developers out there who, for good or bad reasons, want to get things up quickly, and there's costs and benefits, et cetera. And so we do need to hold those people accountable. But it's, it's not just using the law, it's also convincing people that it's in their best interest. And so the Delta, it's in their best interest, in my opinion, to create a nice waterfront path around there. And so we should put pressure on them to do that kind of thing. Not just the Delta, there's lots of examples of that. So I think it's a combination of using the legal tools, which I think are actually increasingly working to the benefit of the kinds of things we're looking for, but making sure that, that we push those things and keep them alive in the public imagination.
Oh, thanks. I'm not aware of all the details of the plan that's coming together, but something's really struck me here about this idea of connectivity. I think it's an essential core piece of what you're doing. And every time I hear it, I immediately think of all these problems that you're talking about and how are we going to, connect all these pieces of land that have all these complexities attached to them. And the other thing that I keep thinking every time I hear this word connectivity, I think, don't people get it? All the shoreline's already connected by the water, right? And like as a boater and someone who's out on the water all the time, I already see it as all connected. And I just returned from Venice and Lake Garda, and of course, they are connected, very connected, but there's private property, there's government property, there's military places, but they connect them with ferries. They don't have buses that go on wheels in Venice, they have boat buses. In Lake Garda, they have, hydrofoiling ferries that zip back and forth. And I think we really need to think about making sure that whatever we do, that the way to get the connections that bridge those gaps in the, whether it's private property or some piece of property that we can't develop, I think we really need to think about how to connect them through the water and through access to the water. So, if you're going to, make it a park, make sure there's a little boat dock or a little ramp or, a beach that you can pull a boat up on. And that will connect all these disparate parts. Anyway, I hope that's going to be part of the thinking, and I congratulate you both for all the great work you've done. So thank you.
Just to comment on your point just for a second, I think that many times when I give a talk on this, I always forget to mention, I call it the blue space, because we always talk about it from the green space, right? But the blue space is also very important. So I agree with you, and I think that's a really good point. Also, from a land access strategy, I didn't go into that here because that's a big, chunk of what we're looking at as well, and we do have a big team of people behind us looking at that as well. When we were talking about how do we jump from point to point to point, we're showing, what we think is the best sort of ideal. I always compare it to when I start drawing something. I look at the blank sheet piece of paper and I think, oh my God, what am I going to do? And the blank piece of paper scares me, but as soon as I draw one line, then I'm okay. And I think that's the same thing as the waterfront. You don't look at it and as a whole, oh my God, we'll never get this connected. You draw one line, you draw another line, and suddenly it becomes something you want.
I'll just add to that too. There's a third dimension which is under the water, and the scuba people have actually opened my eyes, so to speak, to that. And there's a very active scuba community in town, and some fabulous scuba diving. And again, if you Google just scuba diving in Kingston, there's some amazing footage that they've put up of some of the wrecks and so on. And I think there's a possibility to think about underwater parks as well. So there is that kind of third dimension.
I would like to congratulate you, first of all, for all the work you've done and the very exciting plans. I'm really excited about this, and I hope I'm going to be around to see the culmination in a few years' time. I want to put in a plea on behalf of a large proportion of the population and a large proportion of the tax-paying public, and that is older people. I looked at your charming pictures of the walkway in Victoria and Quebec City and so on. I didn't see a tree. I didn't see a bit of shade. I didn't see a place where we can sit. My husband and I, we're both 80, and we can't walk as much as we used to. We love to walk. It's good for us in many ways. And we've had experience with waterside walkways. Again, where there are no trees, there's no place to sit. We can't do it. So please, in your planning, I hope you've thought of this, remember that this aging population of ours, of which there are many millions, we can't we can't be as active as we once were. And we'd like to sit down in between our stretching our legs and sit under a tree and enjoy the surroundings. Thank you.
Shade's a very important aspect. I have 2 little ones, so I'm always looking for shade. So I didn't really go into it, but I mean the focus area 5, which is the downtown area. I always found the downtown waterfront was lacking in shade, and that's my experience as well. So we actually the promenade that we were thinking of is something that would be a treed promenade. It would be something that would have lots of seating underneath it, where people could sit in the shade. It wouldn't interfere with views. We're not thinking of that. But we just want people, because I know I like to sit under a shady tree. I don't like sitting in full sun. That's just the way I am. And I think a lot of people are like that as well. So that is definitely part of our plan.
I think the other thing we've been hearing a lot about is washroom facilities, which are, I think, really important and are, I think, slowly making their way onto the official planning. I think we also need water fountains. And again, it gets back to this point about educating people about this hydrological cultural cycle, right? So, I mean, I'd like to see a couple of showcase water fountains which say, you know, look over there, that's what you're drinking. And this is why it's clean and healthy, and this is what the city's done to make that happen. And when you flush this toilet, here's where it's going. You know, people don't like to talk about poo, but hey, that's really important to our waterfront health. And so we need that kind of understanding of the kind of sanitation water cycle. And so I think there's an opportunity to address both the kind of, you know, physical infrastructure needs and that kind of social understanding of our waterfront. Yeah, in fact, a lot of places have done it, you know, amazing mosaic fountains and so on, you know. So, you know, a lot of places in the world actually, if you go to Europe, you know, they showcase some of these public facilities. And I think that's a potential that we could have here too.
Other than between May 24th and Thanksgiving.
Yeah, well, you can't, everything's frozen, basically.
Yes.
Thank you very much for your presentation. As an avid water lover, I tried living in a city, one of Ontario's lovely cities that had no water. So I returned to Kingston and have enjoyed both working and being on the water when I can. One of the comments when somebody says you have your back face to the water is really true. And in your planning with parks and bringing people to the water, there's also the water is our liquid gold. It is where an economy can happen. And when you're worried about infrastructure and tax dollars and businesses, business can happen on the water. You look at the Halifax Harbor, all the business along there, everyone loves it, and many people say, this is just like Kingston. This could be Kingston. Your boardwalks along the breakwater are fabulous. Cities that have rivers running through them, Boston, the head of the Charles, the head of the Fish, 300,000 people come to one race. All the restaurants, all the hotels, right in the middle of the city, in front of everyone's yards. It's fabulous. We have the river, we have the lake, we have Cork, we have windsurfing. That's an economy. And having looked and watched for many years, I don't see anyone except the attendees watching or wondering what's going on the water. So that's our goal. That's our ability to earn an income and an infrastructure and pay for this, because no one else has this. We have 2 World Heritage sites. I can't see them. There's a wall blocking 2 World Heritage sites. And we have rooftop views that could be exploited and enjoyed by all. So that's my say. I love the water. I love Kingston. But it's also our goal, and it's something we can invest and reinvest and not have everyone think we're just spending. There's a return on our investment.